This field wasn't built for slum kids like you. Go back to your dirt streets. You won't make this. You're gonna miss. Look at me when I speak to you. You're scared.
Malik did not answer. He looked past Darius, past the referee's raised whistle, at the white circle painted on the grass, at nothing else. The stadium noise dropped into a single heavy hum around them, the way a room goes quiet before bad news. His studs pressed into grass better than anything he had ever played on, his chest rising too fast for a boy trying to look calm. Behind him, thousands of black faces filled the stands under the floodlights, waiting on a boy who had once played this same game, barefoot on broken concrete. Somewhere, under the noise, Malik heard something quieter, a rope biting into his shoulder, a coin counted twice, a voice telling him not to let sickness bury his future.
Now we will watch Malik's penalty kick.
6 months earlier, none of this stadium had existed for him at all. The sun over Accra's market was already merciless by mid-morning, and the air smelled of diesel, ripe fruit, and dust kicked up by 1,000 feet. Malik carried a sack of grain twice his own weight across the uneven stalls, the rope handle cutting a groove into shoulders, too young for that kind of weight. He set the sack down at last, wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and counted the coins in his palm twice before he let himself trust the number. A trader nearby called out the day's price of tomatoes, and Malik did the math automatically, the way boys do when hunger has taught them arithmetic before school ever did. It was enough for half the medicine his mother needed, not all of it, and he had known that before he finished counting. He carried the coins to the pharmacy stall anyway, because half today was better than none tomorrow, and tomorrow he would find the rest. Some evenings the money stretched only far enough for one of them to eat properly, and it was never Malik who let himself be the one chosen. At home, the tin roof ticked and groaned in the heat as Amamensa lay on a thin mat, a folded cloth pressed to her forehead, her breathing careful in a way healthy people never noticed about their own. Malik knelt beside her and set down a small paper bag of tablets, arranging them on the floor like they were worth more than they were, like the arranging itself was a kind of care. Her voice thin but steady, the question she always asked before any other.
Did you eat today?
I ate at the market, Malik said, and did not look at her when he said it, because looking at her would have given the lie away. He had not eaten since the morning before, and his stomach had long since stopped complaining about it out loud. Neighbors said nothing when they noticed him thinner each month, because in that part of Accra, hunger dressed like everyone else's hunger, and no one pointed at what they all carried. It was a kindness of a kind, the not pointing, even if it never once filled a stomach. Amma studied his face longer than she needed to, the way mothers do when they already know a lie and are deciding whether to spend their strength on it. She reached for his hand instead of arguing with him, her fingers thin but her grip still certain.
Do not let my sickness bury your future.
Malik held her hand and said nothing, because agreeing felt like a promise he was not sure he could keep, and lying to her twice in one evening felt like more than he could carry. He stayed until her breathing slowed into sleep, tucking the cloth back over her forehead, then went outside to sit against the cool concrete wall and let his own hunger finally show on his face where no one could see it. From somewhere down the block, the sound of a ball striking concrete rose over the evening noise, familiar as his own heartbeat, and something in his chest loosened for the first time all day. On the concrete pitch behind the block, a dozen boys chased a ball, scarred from years of bare feet and broken glass, swept carefully to the edges. Malik walked in still smelling of the market, and the game paused just long enough for someone to toss him the ball without anyone needing to ask if he was playing. He controlled it without looking down, the way a man checks a door he has opened 1,000 times, already reading the spaces between defenders before they had finished moving into them. A defender clipped his ankle from behind and sent him sprawling hard onto the concrete, and the boys on the sideline sucked air through their teeth at the sound of it. Malik pushed himself up without looking for sympathy, rolled his shoulder once, and did not look at the boy who had fouled him, because looking would have cost him a step. He picked the ball up again 3 touches later, cut past 2 defenders with a drag and a half-turn that left one of them sitting down, and drove it low into the gap between 2 stacked cinder blocks that served as a goal. The block erupted the way it always did, like this happened every single day, because it did, and because none of them had ever once doubted that it would. A few streets over, a radio carried commentary from a real match happening somewhere else in the world, and not one boy on that concrete pitch stopped to listen. Kojo, 11 years old and missing a shoe, ran onto the pitch and grabbed Malik's arm like he had just watched something holy happen in broad daylight. Malik plays like the ground obeys him. Malik laughed for the first time all day and rubbed the boy's head, his eyes already drifting toward home and the mother waiting there. Older men watching from the low wall nodded to each other without needing to say why, the way men do when they have already agreed on something years ago. It was a kind of skill no academy had taught him and no poverty had ever managed to take back. On that pitch, in that block, Malik Mensah was already a champion, whether the world outside Accra ever noticed him or not, and for one more evening, that was enough. A stranger had been standing at the edge of the pitch for the last few minutes, a black man in his 40s with a scout's patient stillness, watching Malik the way the boys watched the ball. Thomas Reed had seen 1,000 boys try to look talented on a pitch like this one, and only rarely a boy who simply was talented, without trying at all. When the game broke up, Thomas approached Malik and introduced himself as a scout for Northbridge Academy in England, his handshake firm but unhurried. He had watched 3 full minutes before ever stepping onto the pitch, long enough to be sure of what he was seeing. Malik was polite but wary, the way poverty teaches a boy to be wary of strangers in good clothes who arrive with offers that sound too easy.
I am not selling anything. I am asking to walk you home.
At the tin roof house, Thomas removed his cap before he stepped inside, and greeted Amma with a respect that visibly surprised her, as though she had expected less from a man dressed that well. He explained the trial plainly. A real academy, a real chance, no promises, beyond an honest look, and a fair trial once Malik arrived. He did not mention the other boys he had walked away from without an offer, the ones whose feet had never quite matched their hearts. Amma's eyes moved to Malik, to the boy who had spent the whole afternoon pretending he was not hungry for her sake, and something in her chest ached with a pride that had nowhere to go. She had raised him alone, and in that single glance, she saw every version of him she had ever worried she would lose. She asked Thomas one question only, whether her son would be seen fairly there, or simply used and discarded like so many boys before him. Thomas answered that he could not control other men's greed, only his own honesty, and that honesty was the only thing he had to offer her in exchange for her son. Amma nodded slowly, pain moving across her face that had nothing to do with her illness and everything to do with letting go, watching Malik help his mother sit up straighter without being asked to.
That kind of courage cannot be trained.
Amma held her son's face in both hands and told him to go, even though letting him go cost her more than her sickness ever had. Malik pressed his forehead gently to hers, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left that words could carry. He packed the little he owned into a single worn bag, taking nothing that was not already broken in, because there was nothing new left in his life to bring. As Malik stepped through the doorway into the dark, Kojo and the other boys from the block stood outside in silence, watching their champion leave for a world that had not yet seen him play. Amma stood in the doorway long after he was gone, one hand pressed flat against the tin wall, as if the house itself could tell her whether she had made the right choice. Northbridge Academy's training pitch was so flat and green it looked unreal, nothing like the cracked concrete Malik had learned to read like a second language. He laced his first pair of real boots slowly, still amazed that leather could fit a foot instead of the other way around. Around him, academy boys moved through organized drills in perfect lines, cones and whistles, marking a rhythm Malik had never needed before. Everything here had a system, A schedule. A name for a movement that on the block had simply been called playing. Darius Blake watched him from across the pitch, arms folded, sizing him up the way a boy sizes up a threat rather than a teammate.
Street tricks don't work here.
Malik said nothing back, only nodded and jogged toward the drill line, determined to prove himself with his feet instead of his mouth. He followed the cones as instructed, matched the tempo of the other boys, and told himself that discipline was just another language he could learn. By the end of the session, his legs burned in places the concrete pitch back home had never reached. A different kind of tired, he refused to let show on his face. At dinner that night, the dining hall smelled of food richer than anything Malik had eaten in months, trays stacked higher than he had ever seen in one place. Other boys piled their plates without a second thought, the way people do when hunger has never once been a decision for them. Someone laughed loudly at the far end of the table about a meal from a restaurant Malik had never heard of, and the sound of that laughter felt like it came from another country entirely. When a staff member asked if he wanted a second plate, Malik said he was full and drank a second glass of water instead to quiet his stomach. He watched the leftover food scraped into bins at the end of the meal and said nothing about it, because saying something felt like admitting too much. Later, alone in the dormitory hallway, he sent his mother a short message telling her he had already eaten well, twice, and that the academy fed him more than enough. He did not mention that he had gone to sleep hungry in a room nicer than any he had ever slept in. Even in a place this wealthy, Malik still felt the same hunger he had always known how to hide, only now there was no one nearby who would have understood why. One boy, quieter than the rest, slid an extra roll across the table toward him without a word and without waiting to be thanked. Malik ate it slowly, grateful, and did not ask the boy's name, afraid that noticing kindness too closely might scare it away. The trial match began the next morning with Darius as captain deciding who received the ball and who did not. 3 times Malik made the exact run Thomas had told him to make, timing it perfectly against the defensive line, and 3 times the pass never came. Once the ball did come toward him early, but Darius called for it back at the last second, took a wild shot himself, and missed well wide of the goal. When the coach asked what happened, Darius said Malik had drifted out of position, and no one on the pitch corrected him. The 4th time, when the ball finally reached him, it came late and behind him, forcing him to fight off 2 defenders alone in a corner of the pitch. Panic crept into his touch under that pressure, and he tried to dribble through a gap that a calmer, earlier pass would have solved easily for anyone. He lost the ball, and Darius threw his hands up toward the coach, as if he had just witnessed exactly what he had predicted all along. Coach Kwesi Bell watched from the sideline, arms crossed, writing something on his clipboard without looking up again. He had seen enough of the session to think Malik reckless and undisciplined, but not enough of it to see the 3 runs that had never once been rewarded.
Talent without discipline cannot help us.
Malik jogged back into position without arguing, because arguing was a luxury he had never once been allowed to have, not on the block and not here. No one on the pitch offered him the ball again for the rest of the session, and no one needed to say why out loud. Malik did not argue the sabotage to anyone, not because he had not seen it, but because he had learned long ago that being right rarely mattered more than being believed. In the locker room after the trial, Darius picked up Malik's first boots from the bench where he had left them, still damp from the grass. He held them up for the rest of the team to see, turning them over slowly, like evidence in a trial of his own making.
Nice boots cannot make you belong.
Darius set the boots down in the middle of the floor and gave them a light kick, sending them sliding back across the tile toward Malik. A few boys laughed under their breath, quick and quiet, the kind of laugh that costs nothing to give and everything to receive. No one in the room stepped in to stop it, and the silence afterward was its own kind of cruelty, heavier than the joke itself. Malik crossed the room, picked up his boots without a word, and sat down to lace them again like nothing had happened at all. One boy near the door looked like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it and looked away instead. Later, when the room had emptied, he sat alone with the boots in his lap. Tracing the stitching Thomas had paid for with money, the man clearly did not have to spare. He thought about the sack of grain, the coins counted twice, and wondered if he had traded one kind of hunger for a worse one. He did not tell his mother about the boots, or the laughter, or the coach's clipboard, because her worry was a weight he had promised himself never to add to. In a small office down the hall, Victor Haynes placed a call to Ghana while Malik sat outside on a bench, unaware his name was the entire subject of it. Victor's voice stayed calm and businesslike, the tone of a man who had made this exact call to other frightened mothers many times before. He told Amma that the next round of medicine had already been arranged through the academy's contacts, and that all she needed to do was sign a few papers on her son's behalf.
The medicine waits until the papers are signed. Do you understand?
Amma asked to see the papers first, her voice careful, buying time the way a woman learns to when she has no other power left in the room. Victor read her a summary instead of sending the papers themselves, each word chosen to sound generous while explaining nothing at all. He reminded her, gently, that a poor report from an academy like Northbridge could follow a boy for years, the kind of thing other clubs would always ask about later. Amma listened without interrupting, filing away every word the way a woman does when she is deciding exactly how much of a threat to take seriously. She did not sign that night, and she quietly kept the recording of the call on her old phone, though she could not yet say exactly why she needed to. She moved the phone to the bottom of a tin box under her mat, the same box where she kept the little money she had left, as if the recording itself needed protecting. Victor hung up satisfied, certain that fear for a sick mother would do the convincing for him eventually, the way it always had before. Amma sat with the unsigned papers folded on her lap long after the call ended, one hand resting on them like she was holding down something that might otherwise fly away. She did not yet understand every clause written there, but she understood the shape of the trap well enough not to sign it blind. In the corridor outside the coach's office, Victor found Malik alone and offered him a version of Thomas that was not the truth. He said Thomas's career had been fading for years, that the old scout was chasing one last discovery to save his own reputation before he retired with nothing.
Thomas needs a miracle. You are not a boy to him. You are proof.
Malik said nothing, but the words settled into him the way poison settles, quietly, beneath something that still looked like trust from the outside. He began to watch Thomas differently after that, searching the older man's kindness for a motive that had never actually been there. That same evening, Thomas sat alone with the training footage from Malik's trial, watching it a second time, then a third, unable to let it go. Frame by frame, he saw what the written report had conveniently left out, the passes that never came, the corner Malik had been pushed into alone.
This report is not what happened.
Thomas closed his laptop slowly, the quiet fury of a man realizing he was being used to help bury the very talent he had found. It reminded him too closely of his own playing days, of a coach who had once written him off with a single unfair line in a single report. He did not yet know about the phone call to Ghana, only that something around Malik did not add up and that his own name was attached to the lie. The next morning, Thomas asked a member of the medical staff a quiet question about Malik's file, and the hesitation in her answer told him almost as much as the footage had. He began keeping his own notes after that, dated and careful, the habit of a man who had once lost everything for trusting a system instead of his own eyes. He said nothing to Malik yet, unwilling to hand the boy a suspicion he could not fully prove. 3 nights later, Malik stood at a ticket counter near the airport transit station, counting out coins he had saved for a very different reason. The clerk slid a single ticket back across the counter without looking up, and Malik folded it into his pocket like something he was ashamed to be holding. He sat on a metal bench under a flickering light, untied his first boots, and set them beside him, no longer sure they belonged to him at all. A departure board overhead clicked through gate numbers with a sound like a countdown he had chosen for himself. When he called his mother, her voice sounded stronger than his own, hopeful in a way that made the lie he was about to tell feel even heavier. She asked, the way she always did, whether the coaches were treating him fairly, and Malik answered before he could think better of it.
I am still fighting, Mama.
Amma told him she was proud of him, and Malik pressed the phone hard against his ear so she would not hear the way his breathing had changed. He hung up, stared at the ticket in his hand, and let himself come as close to crying as he had allowed himself all year. For a moment he thought of walking back inside to return the ticket, then decided against it, telling himself he could always decide again later. Around him, the station emptied slowly, buses pulling away one by one, each one a version of the boy he could still choose to be. He stood twice, meaning to walk toward the departure gate, and twice sat back down without knowing exactly why. Somewhere nearby, past the buses and the fluorescent light, a ball struck concrete once, then again, an old sound finding him at the lowest point he had ever known. He almost did not turn toward it, and later he would wonder what would have happened to him if he hadn't. The rough court near the bus station was really just an empty lot, lit by one street lamp that could not decide whether to stay on or die. A loose group of kids played there most nights, some runaways, some simply unclaimed by anyone in particular, kicking a ball gone soft and lopsided from years of use. No one there asked where anyone else came from, and that, more than the game itself, was what kept most of them coming back. Some slept behind the station when the weather allowed it, and a few had families they simply could not go home to yet. The lamp above them flickered on a rhythm of its own, and nobody in the lot seemed to notice or mind. Malik stood at the edge of the light, still holding his boots by the laces, watching without letting himself step closer. Football had once been the only thing he was ever certain of, and now even that certainty felt like something that belonged to another boy. Nia Ajiman sat on an overturned crate nearby, watching the game with the detachment of someone who had learned not to want things out loud. She had been coming to this lot for weeks, long enough that the other kids no longer treated her like a visitor. She noticed Malik before she noticed the ball, the way his eyes tracked its movement even while the rest of him stood perfectly still. She watched him a while longer, noting how he flinched slightly every time the ball came near him and then caught himself before she finally spoke. His feet shifted with every pass, small and unconscious, motion a player's body remembers, even when he insists he is only watching.
You look like someone who forgot he can play.
Malik did not answer right away, unsure whether the comment was an insult or the truest thing anyone had said to him in weeks. He looked down at the boots in his hand, then at the ball rolling loosely toward the edge of the lot, and said nothing at all. Nia studied him a moment longer, then went back to watching the game, as if she had said everything she needed to say for now. The ball rolled to a stop near Malik's feet, and for a moment he only stared at it. The way a man looks at a choice he has already told himself he will not make twice. One of the younger boys shouted for him to send it back, and Malik obliged, meaning only to return it and nothing more. But his touch was too clean, too instinctive, the pass arriving exactly where the boy needed it without either of them planning it that way. A ripple of surprise moved through the group, and someone tossed the ball back toward him, instead of continuing the game without him. Malik hesitated only a second before stepping in, and once his first real touch landed, something in his chest loosened that had been locked shut for days. He played only a few minutes, nothing more than passes and small combinations under the broken streetlight, but it was enough. One of the smaller boys tried to nutmeg him just to see if he could, and Malik let it happen once, laughing, before he stopped letting anything happen by accident again. For the first time since the boots had been kicked across a locker room floor, Malik laughed, short and surprised at his own sound.
When you stopped proving yourself, you started playing again.
Nia watched him from the crate, arms wrapped around her knees, something like recognition crossing her face. For a few minutes, standing under that broken streetlight, Malik had not been a boy running from anything, only a boy playing, and the difference felt enormous. Afterward, Malik and Nia sat near the edge of the lot while the game continued without them, the bus station lights humming faintly behind the fence. Nia asked where he was from, and when he said Accra, something shifted in her voice, careful and quieter than before. Her family, she said, had roots in the same part of Ghana, though she had not set foot there in years, and did not offer more than that. She asked about his mother instead of her own family, quick to turn the conversation away from herself, a habit Malik recognized because he did the same thing with his own pain. He answered honestly, more honestly than he had answered anyone in weeks, and she listened without offering the kind of pity he had learned to dread. It was strange, he thought later, how much easier honesty came to a stranger under a broken streetlight than it ever had to people who loved him. For a while, neither of them said anything, and the silence between them felt easier than most conversations Malik had had in months. She did not tell him yet that her father owned a football club, only that home was complicated for her in ways she was not ready to explain to a stranger. Some nights she slept at a friend's flat 2 streets away. Other nights here among the group, never quite homeless and never quite home either.
My mother used to say the same thing about tickets. That leaving is easy. Staying gone is the hard part.
I know.
Malik, without quite deciding to, told her about the ticket folded in his pocket, the one he had bought less than an hour ago and had not yet used.
A ticket can take you home, but it cannot answer for you.
Nia said it plainly, without cruelty, the way someone speaks when they have already asked themselves the same question and did not like the honest answer. She had bought a ticket once herself, months ago, and never used it either. Malik turned the ticket over once in his hand, and for the first time since buying it, did not immediately put it away. Headlights swept across the lot as a car pulled up near the station, and Nia's posture changed instantly, guarded in a way Malik had not seen from her before. Kofi Ajiman stepped out, tall and controlled, scanning the lot until his eyes found his daughter sitting among strangers he did not recognize. He crossed the distance quickly, relief and frustration fighting for control of his voice at the same time. For a man used to controlling every room he entered, he looked, for a moment, entirely lost. Nia stood before he could speak first, arms crossed, already braced for the conversation they had clearly had many times before. Kofi said her name once, sharp, and asked why she insisted on disappearing into places like this, instead of coming home where she belonged. Nia's answer came fast and furious, that home had stopped meaning anything the moment he chose boardrooms over her mother's hospital room, her voice breaking on the last word, despite her effort to keep it steady.
You built an empire and lost the only person who mattered inside it.
Kofi's jaw tightened, the accusation landing somewhere he had clearly never let himself examine too closely. He started to answer with the same defense he had used for years, that his work had been for her, for both of them, but the words felt hollow even as he began saying them.
I told myself one more deal, one more season I did not know I was choosing until it was already chosen.
Malik, without meaning to insert himself, said quietly that his own mother had once told him not to let sickness bury his future, and that he had almost let it bury hers instead by staying silent.
She needed you beside her, not above everyone.
Kofi turned toward Malik sharply, ready to dismiss the comment from a stranger, but something in the boy's face stopped him before the words came out. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Kofi listened instead of issuing an answer, standing quietly with his daughter's anger and a stranger's grief both aimed at the same wound. He did not apologize out loud, not yet, but something in his shoulders lowered, the posture of a man setting down a weight he had carried too long to name. While the confrontation settled into something quieter, Thomas Reed arrived at the edge of the lot, breathing hard from having half-run the last few blocks. When Malik failed to return to the dormitory that night, Thomas had grown uneasy enough to call Amma directly, a call he had almost talked himself out of making twice. Amma, frightened herself, admitted that Malik's last message had mentioned buses and an airport, enough of a thread for a man who knew the city to follow to this exact station. He carried a folder of footage and reports under one arm, and in his pocket, a recording Amma had finally agreed to send once he told her exactly what Victor had done. Amma had not sent it easily. She had asked Thomas twice whether it would truly protect her son before pressing send, and he had promised her it would. Kofi recognized Thomas immediately, and something like understanding passed between the two men, the recognition of people who had both watched Northbridge operate from different sides of the same industry. Thomas explained plainly what the footage showed, what the recording proved, and what kind of man Victor Haynes had built his career on exploiting.
I am done helping them bury boys like him.
Malik listened to all of it in silence, the ticket still folded in his hand, its weight suddenly different than it had been an hour before. He looked once toward the bus station, toward the gate he could still walk through if he chose to, and then folded the ticket smaller and put it away for good. It was not the evidence alone that decided him, but the sight of Nia and her father standing in the wreckage of their own silence, choosing at last to speak instead of walking away from each other. He thought of his own mother, of a promise he had almost broken by staying quiet, and understood suddenly that leaving now would be its own kind of silence. He did not board the bus that night, not because someone convinced him to stay, but because for the first time in days, staying felt like his own decision. The training ground at Agiman Rovers looked nothing like Northbridge, less polished, more purposeful, built by someone who had once needed a chance himself. Malik ate without hiding how hungry he was, and no one at the table seemed to notice or care how much was on his plate. For the first time since leaving Accra, food stopped feeling like something he had to earn twice, once by working, and once by pretending he did not need it. A coach walked him patiently through positioning he had never been taught, breaking down instinct into structure without stripping the instinct away. No one here mistook his silence for arrogance or his hunger for weakness, and slowly he stopped bracing for either. Coaches corrected his positioning without ever mocking his instincts, and discipline finally felt like something built with him instead of imposed on him. He called his mother most evenings now, and for the first time in weeks, he did not have to invent a version of himself that sounded stronger than he felt. A lawyer Kofi's team had arranged reviewed the old Northbridge papers line by line, explaining plainly what Victor had tried to make Amma sign without her understanding. The lawyer confirmed what Amma had already sensed, that the unsigned papers protected no one but Victor, and that her son's future belonged to no contract she had never agreed to. Kofi watched Malik train from the sideline more often than he needed to, arms crossed, saying little, offering nothing that resembled a shortcut.
I can open the gate, but you must cross the field.
Malik nodded and went back to work, grateful for a fairness he had never once been offered inside Northbridge's walls. Week by week, his body changed with the training, stronger through the legs, calmer under pressure, disciplined in a way that never dulled the instinct that had always been his. Even the way he walked onto the pitch had changed, less like a boy bracing for a blow and more like a player who expected the ball to find him. Word reached Northbridge within days that Malik Mensah was training at Agiman Rovers, their closest rival, under Kofi's own banner. Victor began quietly preparing a story that painted Malik as ungrateful, a talent stolen rather than a boy who had simply been allowed to breathe. He rehearsed the language carefully, the same businesslike calm he had used on every parent he had ever cornered. He had used the word ungrateful before, on other boys, and it had always worked long enough to matter. Darius heard the news in the locker room and said nothing, though something in his jaw suggested he was already counting the days until he could humiliate Malik a second time, in front of everyone. The Northbridge Agiman Rovers rivalry match sold out within a day of being announced, both sides of the city aware that more than a match was on the line. Vendors outside the stadium sold scarves in both clubs' colors, and for one night, the entire city seemed to be arguing about the same 17-year-old boy. Malik walked out in Agiman colors for the first time in a competitive fixture, the concrete pitch behind him, and the tin roof over his mother's bed, both somehow present in the same breath. He scanned the crowd once, not for anyone in particular, and then made himself stop looking and start preparing. Darius found him early, shoulder to shoulder near the touchline, voice low enough for only Malik to hear.
You still belong outside the gates.
Malik said nothing, the way he had learned to say nothing, and let his first touch answer instead. He received the ball under pressure near the halfway line, held off a challenge with his body, and slipped a pass through a gap only he seemed to see. An Aggie men forward buried the chance, and the away end of the stadium, filled with black faces who had traveled from every corner of the city, rose to their feet as one. Somewhere in that crowd, a small group waved a hand-painted sign with Malik's name on it, the paint still slightly wet from that morning. Darius doubled his pressing after that, chasing Malik down every time he touched the ball, frustration replacing whatever composure he had walked out with. Once, late in the half, Darius caught him with a shoulder a beat after the ball was gone, and the referee's whistle cut through the noise before Malik could even react. Malik took the free kick himself rather than hand it to a teammate, and though it did not lead to a goal, the away end roared anyway, for the nerve of it alone. In the second half, Malik received the ball tight against the touchline, two defenders closing fast, and escaped with a single touch that left both of them stranded. The crowd's roar followed him the length of the pitch, the sound of a stadium slowly changing its mind about a boy it had only just met. He carried the ball forward alone, drew the last defender out of position, and slid a pass to a teammate for Aggie Man Rover's second goal. Kofi, watching from the director's box, allowed himself the smallest smile, the first anyone there had seen from him all season. Northbridge pushed forward desperately in the final minutes, and in the box, a defender's arm caught the ball in clear view of the referee. The whistle blew, sharp and final, and the referee pointed to the penalty spot, the exact spot where this entire story had begun. A murmur moved through both ends of the stadium at once, the strange recognition of a moment that felt bigger than the match itself. Somewhere in the stands, a small Ghanaian flag caught the wind again, the same kind that had flown above the tunnel on the night this story began. Malik placed the ball on the spot himself, and this time it was Darius who stood back and said nothing at all. He did not look for Darius this time, only at the ball, the way he had looked at it on that very first night before anyone knew his name. For one long second, the stadium noise fell away entirely, and all Malik heard was a rope biting into his shoulder, a coin counted twice, and a voice telling him not to let anything bury his future. He struck it clean and low, and the goalkeeper guessed the wrong way, and the net moved before the stadium had finished holding its breath. The Agyeman end of the stadium erupted, thousands of black voices chanting his name until it filled every corner of the ground. The final whistle followed minutes later, and Agyeman Rovers had beaten Northbridge on their own occasion, in front of everyone who had once written Malik off. In the tunnel after the match, still in his kit, Malik saw Kofi and Thomas waiting near the players' corridor with a look that told him the night was not finished yet. They led him toward a side office where academy staff and a compliance officer Kofi had quietly invited were already gathered. Victor Haynes arrived moments later, still composed, still certain he could talk his way through whatever this was. Kofi set the folder of footage and reports down on the table between them, and beside it, Thomas placed his phone, ready to play the recording Amma had sent. Victor smiled the way he always did before a negotiation, certain he still held some advantage no one else in the room could see. He tried to call it business, a private arrangement between consenting adults, nothing anyone else needed to concern themselves with.
You called it business because you were ashamed to call it theft.
Kofi's voice stayed level, even as the words landed hard, and around them, the staff listened without interrupting. Thomas played the recording once, Victor's own voice naming the medicine and the papers in the same breath, and the room went silent in a way that needed no further explanation. Victor's smile did not survive the second sentence of his own recorded voice. Within the week, Victor Haynes was informed that his partnership with Northbridge was terminated and that a formal report was being filed with the Football Federation. Word moved quickly through the academy that other families Victor had pressured over the years were already being contacted, and some, for the first time, were ready to speak. By the next morning, a sports reporter who had covered Northbridge for years was already asking the Academy's board pointed questions in public, questions the board could no longer answer with silence. One father who had once signed papers he never fully understood called the Academy that same night, asking whether it was too late to challenge them. He was not the only one. By morning, 3 more calls had come in, each one a small crack in a silence Victor had counted on for years. Coach Kwesi Bell watched the same footage the next morning, saw what the written report had left out, and stripped Darius of the captain's armband before the team had even finished changing, the coach told him, and no one in the room disagreed.
Leadership without honor is just noise.
The contract path Northbridge had promised, Darius quietly disappeared, along with it, the club unwilling to build its future on a name now tied to sabotage. Darius said nothing in his own defense, because for the first time, there was nothing left to say that would change what the footage showed. Half a world away, in the alley outside Amma Mensah's tin roof home, neighbors crowded around an old television propped on a wooden crate, the signal crackling but clear enough to matter. Someone had run an extension cord from 2 houses down just to keep the set alive long enough for the match to finish. Amma pressed both hands to her mouth as the commentator's voice said her son's name clearly enough for the whole alley to hear, and Kojo climbed onto the wall to see over the crowd, shouting louder than anyone else there. The whole block spilled into the alley, the same boys who once cheered him on broken concrete, now cheering a stadium they would never see in person. Home knew before the world did. Kojo said it to no one in particular, grinning, already certain everyone around him had always known it too. Someone in the alley started singing the same street chant the boys used to sing after every goal on the concrete pitch, and within seconds the whole block had joined in. In the weeks that followed, Amma began treatment fully paid and no longer delayed by anyone's signature but her own. She stood taller within days, the kind of change that had nothing to do with medicine alone. At the next Aguiman Rovers match, Nia crossed the director's box to stand beside her father, dressed unlike anything Malik had seen her wear at the bus station, and for a moment he barely recognized her. She caught him staring and only smiled. The two of them sharing a joke neither needed to explain to anyone else. Thomas watched from the sideline with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally protected a talent instead of losing one. He had spent years carrying the guilt of a boy he could not save. This time, he had not looked away. A call came from the Ghana Football Association not long after, inviting Malik to train with the national setup. On the day he arrived, Malik pulled on national colors for the first time, lacing boots that no longer needed anyone else's permission to fit. He thought briefly of Nia, of a crate near a bus station, of a girl who had told a stranger he looked like someone who forgot he could play. Somewhere behind him, he could almost hear the old sound of a ball striking concrete, the sound that had once found him at the lowest point he had ever known. He walked toward the tunnel where players waited before stepping onto the field, his family's voices somehow still audible beneath the noise of the crowd ahead. He walked into the tunnel in full stride, his mother's voice, his village's chants, and his own long road all moving with him toward the light at the far end. He did not escape the slums. He carried them with him,